Welcome to the podcast series Talking Success, connecting the global FinTech community. I'm Stacey Jafta, and today I'll be chatting with Joe Keeley, CEO and co-founder of Justifi Technologies. Justifi's mission is to democratize access to competitive payment processing rates and embedded FinTech products. Hi, Joe.
Hi, Stacey. How are you?
Good. How's your day so far?
Terrific. Thanks.
Nice. It's morning on your end, isn't it?
That's right. That's right.
I love to ask my guests what their wake-up time is, what their morning routine is. I think there must be some magic in this. So what does yours look like?
Well, during the week, it's, about 5:45 a.m. And I really have one ritual that if I break, I'm in big trouble with that is
okay.
I'm in charge of making and bringing coffee to my wife, and then we chat.
I love it.
She won't sit up if that doesn't happen. So when I'm traveling, she's in a world of hurt. So I take care of that, and then we kind of have our daily huddle in a way. Sometimes there's lots to talk about. Sometimes there's not. We have two kids that are in junior high and high school. So and then sort of the day gets rolling at 6:15, 6:30, and people are getting ready for school if it's school year, down working out, and sort of we're off and running from there.
Has that always been your wake up time? Was that earlier than usual?
Sometimes I guess, I used to get up a lot earlier, but this is very painful.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
Yeah, that's about it. I mean, I maybe not on the weekends, but during the week, yes.
Okay, awesome. Joe, before we go any further, for the audience, just can you set the scene and tell us more about your career journey and then essentially what led you to build Justifi?
Sure. So I've been involved in a number of different ventures, but Justifi is really the second material sort of growth company that I've had the pleasure of leading and building. The first kind of put me in. It was a journey where I started a platform that was in the childcare space, believe it or not, which is sort of makes me uniquely unqualified to run a FinTech company, perhaps. But I was in university as an undergrad and was a hockey player. I live in St. Paul, Minnesota, which, it's still very, very dark, and cold in the winter mornings. But I played hockey in university. I got a summer job answering an ad that perhaps is only placed in Minnesota. And it said, looking for a hockey player to watch our two boys. And I became a nanny for the summer for two boys that were hockey players. And I became their coach, referee, chauffeur, etc. But most importantly, I think I really became their role model and sort of a big brother figure. Well, from that experience, I ended up starting a company called College Nannies, Sitters, and Tutors, where, initially we placed as a staffing company college students that, just as the name indicated, were nannies, sitters, and tutors. And then over time really took quite it was a 15-year overnight success, I would say, like a lot of businesses tend to be, where maybe the media likes to talk about overnight success, but the reality is, it takes a lot of people and a lot of time, most of the time, to grow a business. So at the end of that road, we had turned it into a franchise company. We had built a vertical SaaS platform and a mobile-based booking system, and we had over 10,000 employees and 200 locations in the US and the UK, and ended up selling that to a public company, a childcare company out of Boston. I stayed on for 3 years or so, decided not to run Europe for them, which actually was a great blessing because that was months before the pandemic hit. And then took some time off. And then so that was my first sort of journey, and had all aspects of the entrepreneurial journey from, creation literally in a dorm room to exiting, to raising money, to, all sorts of twists and turns. And then I got connected with my now partners who started a very, very successful vertical SaaS company in the sports tech space. And what they found, like many vertical SaaS companies, is that it's really, really hard to build a $1 billion company off of $65 a month in SaaS fees. But that once addressable market can be expanded, exponentially by providing embedded value to those folks that are loyal and using the vertical SaaS companies. And that is often found, at least for them, was in embedded payments, insurance, lending, kind of the whole FinTech stack. So they processed over $4 billion a year. They lent and they sold insurance, all sorts of things to the youth sports organizations and parents, and ultimately did sell close to $1 billion to NBC Comcast. So they looked back on that journey, and similar to mine, first journey, it took a decade and a half. And they said, wow, it was a really great ending, but that was really complicated and really expensive, and there must be a better and different way. So we got together and said, well, what if we created, a white label infrastructure and team that allowed vertical SaaS companies to not have to go hire a chief payments officer and not have to hire 50, FinTech engineers and be able to take advantage of that. So that's why we started Justifi. So
you started it in the midst of COVID.
I mean, we'll be in there forever, but we started it just about almost 2 years ago. Yeah.
Okay. What was that experience? Because I was very early stage when COVID just hit. Was that scary to be starting a business? How was that?
It was kind of after the first major wave of quarantine hit. So, it was okay. And in the beginning, virtual is just fine. But now we have an office and a full team and everyone's rolling. So, sadly, it was becoming kind of normal. We were getting used to that as, connecting and working. But, I've always liked to think that there's never a good time and there's never a bad time to start a business. There's just your time.
So you sold your nanny business. How did you know it was the right time? Talking about there's never a right time, it's just your time. How did you know it was the right time for you? And what advice do you have for those in the middle of making this decision? Do they sell up their business? Do they keep on going? How was that decision made for you?
Well, I've heard that, and I agree with the notion, especially in, early stage to growth companies, that businesses are bought, they're not sold. So, yes, when you're in sort of later stages and maybe selling from one private equity buyer to another, like you can package and hire a banker and go out and sort of run a process and somewhat control it. But I think that there are certain moments in which exiting makes sense. And if you say no to those moments, you kind of need to enter another investment phase or period of time from time to time. So, it's really about being prepared and understanding that you can't always time the market, and you can't always time if you have larger companies. Once for us, we had a very, very large vendor or partner rather, where we were a vendor for them that needed our technology, was using us as a partner, and they had decided it was time to bring this capability in-house. And once a large company, once a public company gets board approval to do that, it enters in a different level of risk that one needs to consider. Like, okay, they're either going to do it with you or they're going to do it with someone else. So what does the world look like if they do it on their own or do it with someone else for you? So, for me, I had, a decade and a half is a pretty good run. So I was ready to actually begin the final chapter of that business, be able to take a sabbatical and then, explore what was next. And what was next turns out to be, a embedded payment and fintech company called Justifi.
If I was coming to you and I was saying, listen, Joe, I have an offer, someone wants to buy my business, what kind of things would you ask me to take into consideration before making that decision?
Well, I think that the first, I think you have to look at the all the mechanics of things like, do we think that this is a fair offer of where you are versus the potential versus, all the sort of, business mechanics is what type of business is it? Is it in, the upswing? Is it in decline as an industry? Like all of those sort of very academic sort of business school like things. And you can, and those tend to be, not as difficult because they are intellectual. But there's also the emotional side of things. Like especially for like first time founders, they talk about their business being their baby. And I think that's, that's both good and bad. It's good. And like, they just nurture it and it helps fuel their success, but it can be kind of bad as well because, you don't sell your baby. But I think of it more like it was ironically when I left the company, it was after, 18 years because I sold after 15 and I stayed on for a few more. So for me, I took pride and joy in it was more like a child that I had raised and sent off to university or to, and they were a fully functioning, able to be on their own. Yeah. So I think really addressing the emotional side of things, and there can be a lot of fear and a lot of identity baked into the business for an entrepreneur. And I think it's important to understand that your business is not you. Even though, that may be uniquely tied to you, I think it's important to understand, this is an asset. It might be an asset that you're very passionate about, but, and it's those emotional components are important all the time. They're even more important if you don't have investors. I was a majority shareholder in the in my first company, whereas we're venture backed by a lot of premier venture companies, firms today. So, we have a board and there's a lot of people around the table. Now, as founder and CEO, I have, a job to steer us and to have my opinion is weighs very heavy. But, this is not, tied. I'm not the only person that this is like my identity, but that it feels very different in a second time founding situation.
Sure. You view yourself as the person working at a train station, making sure everything is running on time. What you feel you need to complement your skill set is someone who can link what the business is doing today with the vision. What does that look like? Is it taking the 5-year plan and breaking it up into weekly tasks, or what exactly was it that you needed?
Well, I think that there's lots of visionaries in the world, and the line between sort of, visionary and insanity is very sort of thin. And I think what differentiates the two is those that can say, okay, here's where we're going. See that, mountain out in the future or that castle on the hill. But like, how do you link, what I'm doing today and tomorrow and with a direction of a company and a vision and fueled by a purpose. So I think in many respects, like I have a dual role as a CEO of a venture backed, seeds to A stage company. And that is one to link, and paint that vision and to make sure we're consistent with our purpose and our values and start building the building blocks in that. And, at this stage of the company, I need to roll up my sleeves and take the garbage out if that's what needs to happen. So I think it is a little bit of both. And I think that if that's the challenge of these stages, if you get someone who's just like true, very, very visionary and has led, big teams, a lot of times they struggle in a small business because they don't have an executive assistant and they can't dial 7 for IT. And like, you have to just be a little grittier. But on the flip side, I've experienced that it took me a while in my sort of, I would say my informal education, which was growing the company after I graduated with an entrepreneurship degree, but my master's degree was in entrepreneurship too, which just happened to be a, decade and a half long case study. That what I've seen is that entrepreneurs that put themselves at the center of the universe tend to be, and then everything orbits around them tend to build really profitable, enjoyable lifestyle businesses. But that tends to be the cap in which they can grow them to. Instead of thinking it more like an entire, galaxy where you have many solar systems, and each one of those solar systems is a sales leader, a product leader, an engineering leader. So my job is to really, balance, acting like the company we want to be and we are growing towards and what we're funding, and also realizing that, but every day, it takes everyone to, roll up their sleeves and get to work. So, because I think that if being too limited on either end of the spectrum is hard at this stage. I'll look forward to getting to the stage where, I'm needed less to do a lot of the things. That's okay. And don't get me wrong, like no one's asking me to write code, but, it's just a stage of company. So it's important to look one stage ahead or two stages ahead, but also realize most of the time, where are you today?
Scott, could you design a video game?
I could make you a hypothetical one. If I took some random genres, mechanics, maybe blended them together and created a new hypothetical game.
Now that would make a great podcast.
Undoubtedly.
So what would you make? Something original and exciting? A Dark Souls city builder? A co-op roguelike?
Everything. All of that. We could use the Nemesis system and put it in a first-person shooter. And we could have a loot system with survival mechanics and motion controls. And maybe you could... I don't know, save a kingdom from some out-of-control toasters. What about party?
Catch the Gaming Blender on all your favourite podcast platforms.
Going back to focusing on what the business is doing today for the vision, can you give some practical tips? I really love when listeners can walk away from this episode and be like, okay, that's something I know is not my strong suit. I need to become better at this. What would you say to them?
I think that first it's okay to just say, I don't know, or I need to help. I need to get better at that. Or because I think a lot of times entrepreneurs, especially, first-time entrepreneurs, they assume this, CEO role, it might be them and no one else, and they're the CEO, and how quickly you can ascend to the title. Nowhere is there a title that it has such great disparate, ranges. But I think not having all the answers is, I think, an important role or important position to have as a CEO. Like that doesn't mean that you still can't make final decisions, but I think it's very, very dangerous and it's actually a detractor to growing an enduring company by thinking that you have to have all the answers. I think what you need to get really good at is having the right questions.
Yeah. And also getting the right person in the right seat is going to help you achieve that vision. And we were chatting about how challenging this can be. How do you attain this?
Well, I think it's a little bit, I try to run, and participate at home, as I do at work. And that is have a few simple rules, repeat them often and be consistent. So, I think those few simple rules is first, as a company, as it relates to talent and building a team, we need to define what is the seats that we need, absent of any people. What is the role that we need? What is for right now and a little bit in the future? And then we need to go out and find the right person for the right seat. So the first thing, focus on having the right seat, then finding the right person. Well, what is the right person? Well, they need to be able to have all the either technical skills or, an experience that seat you defined is. And then, and equally important, they need to align with your articulated core values. And I think that not just I think it's, it's not about having core values that I would, that are it's been called like permission to play core values. It's like, well, honesty, integrity, like those should just be given.
Mm-mm-mm.
It's like unique core values that you can like measure against, right? Someone has a can-do attitude or they don't have a can-do attitude. Like,
Yeah.
it doesn't mean that we're only going to have a team of like go-getting salespeople. Like engineers can have a can-do attitude or not have a can-do attitude. So identifying those core values so that then you have the right person for the right seat.
So we have a value in our business called JDFI, just freaking do it, which is kind of just saying that if you have an idea, go out, like explore it, take initiative, right? And
Sure.
we also are a startup or a small business. We wear multiple hats. Running the podcast isn't my primary job at all, but that's just what we do in our business. You just say yes, you go out and you do it. And when we're interviewing people, this is something we really want to find. Like, are you going to say yes to, we have an event going on, are you going to help plan this event? You're, let's say, in finance, but that's not your job. Are you going to still help and say yes, put your hand up? And every single time you ask this question in an interview, everyone's like, yes, of course, I have a can-do attitude. So then how do you yourself ask the right questions to get these answers?
Well, first of all, I'm not perfect at it. So let's first, perfection is not in the hiring game. We're talking about, curious, a curious thing to hire human beings, which are changing creatures. People change and they have good days and they have bad days. So we're not looking for perfection, but what we're looking to accomplish, I think, is if you can beat the average. And, the bad news or the good news is that, the hiring average is actually kind of terrible out there. So if you can be, if you can start moving up to find A players or really good fits, 50, 60, 70, 80% of the time, like you're really doing a great job. So I think it's less about asking these questions like, would you do this? Or, tell me about this situation, how would you react? Because that's what we do in interviews. Everyone knows how to answer the questions the way the teacher wants them to be answered.
Exactly.
Instead, I think it's one's past experience is the greatest indication of future results. So let's talk about, tell me about a time, that in this particular, and you can even, and someone says, well, I'm hiring a bunch of junior people. It's like, well, they may not have experience in the working world, but they have experience in school clubs and sports and whatever it happens to be. So, it's really about unpacking what are the behaviors and patterns that are very likely to continue, and how does that apply?
Yeah. Over the last few years, you focused on understanding and cracking the code on how to make the dream work. Tell me more about this philosophy.
I think that, there's vision without, traction is hallucination, that, and I think that for me, it goes back to, having a big grand vision, yes, but one that the math works. It's amazing how many, in our nanny business, how many franchises that we would talk to, and their 1 year plan is to be $1 million in revenue, and their 2 year plan is to be $1.5 million in revenue, and their 5 year plan is to be $50 million in revenue. And I would look at that and say, okay, like, is there a rich uncle that is going to give you a bunch of capital that I'm unaware of? Like, it's just about making the math work. So, and not in like a micromanagement sort of way, but just taking the time to, operationally link and make sure that the math works. And I think that we see that a lot. We work with vertical SaaS platforms and help them basically make more money with us than in what they could do on their own or piecing together point solutions. And what I see time and time again is the infinite sort of, well, it's on our roadmap. Oh yeah, we're gonna embed, we're gonna optimize our payments, or we're gonna bring in insurance, or we're gonna bring in lending, or we're gonna do that. It's somewhere out beyond 6 months on our roadmap. And what I found is that someday often never comes. And it's easy to have these sort of important but not urgent things. So and I understand that. I mean, when we were running the franchise business, we had both our product, our tech product, we had our service and brand to consider, and then we were in the franchise business, which was helping entrepreneurs build a business. So we kind of had this multi-headed monster, and I think vertical SaaS platforms have the same thing going on. They need to focus on their product and their existing customers. They're passionate about whatever vertical they're in, barbershop software or sports tech software or logistics software. But this idea of embedding, FinTech and payments and getting really good at that is super overwhelming and daunting, because it's a completely different business. Most technicians or technologists got into a vertical because they had experience or were passionate about that, not because they were experts at, this abstract world that is interchange. So we like to be truly, one of our values is to be a committed partner. And that really means something to us, because we think, candidly, like the fintech industry and payments specifically doesn't have a great reputation. It sort of has this curiously deliberate shroud of secrecy around, there's only one other industry that you don't actually know what something's going to cost you until it's done. And that's healthcare, at least in the United States. And frankly, there isn't a lot of people that are putting that on the pedestal as the way to do healthcare. So we think being a partner to these platforms and helping them figure it out, helping them win is, what being a committed partner looks like.
I love that. Joe, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Where's the best place for listeners to reach you if they have any questions?
So Justifi.ai, that's Justifi, and myself, I'm on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Thanks again.
Thanks so much. Be well.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Talking Success, Connecting the Global FinTech Community. Feel free to follow us on LinkedIn at Talent in the Cloud. And if you're interested in exec talent, expanding your team, or you yourself are looking for a new, exciting change in your career, check out our website, talentinthecloud.io.